In 1941, Greta Mueller married the man hunting her, shared his bed while photographing his orders for mass murder, and saved 300 lives before he finally discovered the truth. Construction workers found the proof hidden behind a basement wall 40 years later, documents from a ghost who'd saved hundreds. On December 15, 1941, nurse Greta Hoffmann ceased to exist. The official German military report stated she died during a supply run to a bombed warehouse in Warsaw's industrial district. They found her coat torn and blood-stained among the rubble, her identity papers scattered across broken concrete, and enough blood to confirm a fatal injury. The Wehrmacht declared her killed in action, filed the paperwork, and forgot about her within a week. One less nurse in a war that consumed thousands daily. The funeral was small. 6 military nurses stood at attention while a chaplain read scripture and clipped German. Dr. Klaus Weber, her husband of 4 months, accepted the folded flag with steady hands. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the empty coffin as if trying to see through the wood to the nothing inside. Later, colleagues would say he took her death hard, became obsessed with finding her body, spent weeks investigating the explosion site. Eventually he stopped. Reassigned to Berlin in March 1942, he never mentioned Greta Hoffmann again. The Warsaw Military Hospital replaced her efficiently. Nurse Anna Fischer arrived from Munich, took over Greta's duties, slept in her quarters. Within 3 months, it was as if Greta had never existed at all. Her name appeared in no records except the death certificate. Her photograph sat in no albums. She vanished completely, which was exactly what she intended. 45 years later, in the spring of 1986, construction workers demolishing a building in Warsaw's Praga district discovered something impossible. Behind a false wall in the basement, hidden beneath decades of dust and forgetting, they found a room. Small, perhaps 3 meters square, sealed so completely that the air inside tasted 40 years old. Inside were wooden crates, their contents preserved perfectly in the darkness. Medical supplies, bandages still white, morphine vials still full. And documents, 127 forged medical certificates, each one a masterpiece of deception. Death certificates for Jews who never died. Transport orders for patients who never existed. Quarantine notices for epidemics that were pure fiction. Every document bore the same signature at the bottom. The initials were cramped, practiced, repeated so many times they'd become automatic. GH. The Polish authorities called in historians, brought in experts on wartime forgeries. Dr. Anna Zimmer, a specialist in resistance networks, spent 6 months analyzing the papers. The forger had medical knowledge, access to official German forms, and the skill to replicate multiple officers' signatures. The documents saved lives, moving people through checkpoints, out of ghettos, away from deportations. Conservative estimates suggested at least 200 people survived because of these papers. But who was GH? The signature matched no known resistance member. German archives contained no record of a forger with those initials operating in Warsaw. It was as if a ghost had worked for years in the heart of occupied Poland, saving lives the Nazis wanted dead, then disappeared without leaving a name. Until Anna found one document different from the rest. A marriage certificate, German military issue, dated August 1941. The bride's signature, hurried and genuine, spelled out the full name, Greta Hoffmann. Greta Hoffmann learned to kill with kindness in Berlin, 1939. The Reich needed nurses for the Polish campaign, women with steady hands and loyal hearts. At 23, Greta had both. Her father had died at Verdun wearing the Kaiser's uniform. Her mother had followed him 6 years later, wasted by grief and influenza. The Nazi recruiting officer saw an orphan with perfect Aryan features and medical training from Charité Hospital. He saw exactly what the Reich needed. She arrived in Warsaw 3 weeks after the invasion, assigned to Military Hospital 7 in the occupied city center. The building still smelled of smoke and Polish blood. German engineers had converted a former school into a medical facility, ripping out desks and installing surgical tables, painting over Polish eagles with swastikas. Greta's dormitory room held 4 narrow beds and 1 small window overlooking a courtyard where civilians once played. Now it held supply trucks and soldiers smoking between shifts. Her supervisor, Oberschwester Kirsch, was a woman carved from Prussian ice. She walked Greta through the wards on her first day, explaining procedures with mechanical precision. German soldiers received morphine. Polish patients did not. Germans got clean sheets changed daily. Poles lay on stained mattresses until infection or death freed the space. Jews were not to be treated at all under any circumstances. If one arrived, call the SS, they would handle removal. Greta nodded at everything, her face composed into the pleasant mask she'd learned in nursing school. Inside, something shifted. She'd expected war to be clear. Germans against enemies. Soldiers against soldiers. Instead, she found herself in a hospital where medicine became a weapon, where healing depended on the shape of a nose or the sound of a name. Her first week passed in a blur of wounded soldiers and antiseptic. She learned quickly, worked efficiently, never complained. The doctors praised her. Kirsch noted her performance in official reports. By October, Greta Hoffmann had established herself as exactly what the Reich wanted, a competent, obedient, thoroughly German nurse. Then came the boy. 14 years old, Polish, carried in by his mother who begged, in broken German. He'd been shot during a random street roundup, caught in crossfire. The bullet had entered below his ribs, exited through his back. Survivable with surgery, fatal without. His mother knelt on the hospital floor, hands clasped, praying in Polish while her son bled on a gurney in the hallway. Dr. Weber appeared, SS medical officer, 32 years old with eyes like winter. He examined the boy for perhaps 10 seconds, then turned to Greta. "The boy is Polish. We don't waste resources on Poles. Move him to the corridor. He can be there or his mother can take him. Either way, he's not our concern." Greta looked at the boy. He stared back at her, silent, understanding he was already dead. She opened her mouth to acknowledge the order. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'll handle it, Herr Doctor." That night, she committed her first act of treason. The boy's name was Jakub Kowalski, and Greta saved him at 2 a.m. when the night shift was thinnest. She told the mother to leave, to come back in 3 days, to tell no one. Then she wheeled Jakub into an empty surgical room and operated alone with only nursing training and desperate determination. She'd assisted in hundreds of surgeries, watched doctors work, memorized every movement. Her hands shook as she cut, found the damaged tissue, sutured what she could reach. He survived, barely. She hid him in the morgue for 2 days, listed as deceased on paperwork she forged with Dr. Weber's signature. The forgery was crude but sufficient. No one checked morgue records carefully. The dead didn't require attention. On the third night, she wrapped Jakub in sheets, loaded him into a laundry cart, and wheeled him past sleeping guards to a service entrance. His Aunt Maria waited in the darkness with a handcart, eyes wide with fear and gratitude. The exchange took 30 seconds. Then Jakub was gone, and Greta walked back inside as if nothing had happened. If stories like this move you, don't forget to leave a like and share in the comments where you're watching from. Maria returned 1 week later, slipping a note to Greta during a supply delivery. "We need morphine. People are suffering. Can you help?" That single question opened a door Greta couldn't close. She began stealing in small amounts, a vial here, bandages there, nothing large enough to trigger inventory concerns. She passed supplies to Maria during staged encounters, quick handoffs in corridors or storage rooms. 2 months of careful theft, and she'd moved enough medical supplies to treat dozens of wounded resistance fighters hiding in Warsaw's shadows. Then, Dr. Agreitment. Weber called her into his office in August, 1940. He sat behind his desk studying inventory reports, his face unreadable. "We're missing morphine," he said quietly. "Significant amounts over the past 2 months. I've investigated the other nurses, everyone except you." Greta felt ice flood her veins. She kept her expression neutral, concerned but not frightened. "Perhaps there's been an accounting error, Herr Doctor." He watched her for a long moment. "Perhaps. But I don't think so. Someone is stealing from this hospital. Someone with access and opportunity." He stood, walked around the desk until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne. "I'm transferring Nurse Anna Fischer to Krakow. She's been unreliable. The paperwork is already filed." Greta understood immediately. He was offering her Anna as a scapegoat, framing another nurse for Greta's crimes. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt sick. Anna was innocent, a quiet girl from Munich who wrote letters to her mother every Sunday. Now she'd carry the suspicion of theft to a new post, her career marked by unfounded accusations. But if Greta confessed, she'd be executed. The morphine had treated resistance fighters, enemies of the Reich. That was treason, punishable by death. She met Weber's eyes and made her choice. "Thank you for your diligence, Herr Doctor. I'm certain the thefts will stop now." He smiled. "I'm certain they will." Anna transferred the next morning. Greta's hands didn't shake when she helped her pack. Greta stopped stealing morphine after Anna's transfer, but she didn't stop resisting. She just became smarter about it. In September 1940, she began keeping a second notebook hidden inside her mattress. In it, she recorded names: SS officers who beat patients, doctors who performed unnecessary surgeries on Poles for practice, guards who shot civilians for sport. She memorized faces with the photographic precision that had made her an excellent nurse, then transcribed details each night by candlelight: names, ranks, dates, crimes. A catalog of monsters wearing German uniforms. She also started forging documents more carefully. Death certificates became her specialty. A Jewish patient, admitted with pneumonia, would die on paper within hours, the certificate signed with a doctor's forged signature. In reality, the patient recovered in a hidden basement room, then slipped out through the morgue exit with papers declaring them Polish Catholics from villages the Germans had already destroyed. No one checked the backgrounds of the dead's relatives too carefully. By November, she'd moved 12 people this way, but she couldn't work alone indefinitely. One nurse could only forge so many signatures, hide so many patients, steal so many supplies. She needed help from others who'd seen too much and couldn't remain silent anymore. Nurse Margaretha Klein was first. 31, from Hamburg, she'd watched a doctor refuse to treat a 6-year-old Polish girl with appendicitis. The girl died screaming over 3 days. Margaretha found Greta crying in the supply closet afterward and said simply, "I want to help. Whatever you're doing, I want to help." Nurse Elizabeth Brown joined in December after witnessing an SS officer execute a patient who'd spoken Polish in his sleep. She was 19, still believed the world should make sense. Greta showed her the notebook, the forged certificates, the hidden room. Elizabeth's hands shook as she read, but she nodded. "Teach me." By March 1941, there were 4 of them. The 4th was Helga Fischer, no relation to Anna but carrying guilt anyway. She'd heard what happened to the other Fischer, knew it was likely false accusation. When Greta quietly revealed the truth, Helga didn't hesitate. "I'm in." They called themselves nothing. No names, no code words, no dramatic declarations. They were just 4 German nurses who decided that some orders were too monstrous to follow. They developed a system. Margaretha handled the forgeries, her handwriting steady and precise. Elizabeth managed the hidden room, bringing food and water. Helga coordinated with Maria and the Polish underground. Greta supervised everything, memorizing details, keeping the master records. Their greatest success came in March. An entire Jewish family, the Goldsteins, were scheduled for deportation. 7 people, including 3 children. Greta forged quarantine papers declaring them infected with typhus, too dangerous to transport. She moved them to the hidden room, then smuggled them out over 3 nights using ambulances and false transfer orders. By the time the SS came looking, the Goldsteins were gone, hidden in safe houses across Warsaw. Dr. Weber watched it all happen, suspicion growing in his winter eyes. Klaus Weber began courting Greta in April 1941, and she knew immediately it wasn't romance. He brought her coffee during night shifts, asked about her family, complimented her efficiency. His attention was careful and calculated, like a surgeon selecting exactly where to cut. She understood what he was doing. He suspected her but lacked proof. Getting close was reconnaissance, not affection. She should have avoided him. Instead, she leaned into the danger. If Weber was watching her, she could watch him back. Access to an SS medical officer meant access to information the resistance desperately needed. So when he invited her to dinner at the officers' club, she accepted. When he asked about her childhood in Berlin, she answered with rehearsed stories that revealed nothing important. When he touched her hand across the table, she didn't pull away. The other nurses were horrified. Margaretha cornered her in the dormitory after the 3rd dinner. "He's SS, Greta, he's dangerous, you're playing with fire." Greta folded laundry with steady hands. "I know exactly what I'm doing. The fire might burn him instead." In June, Weber's courting intensified, and so did the intelligence he carelessly revealed. Over wine, he mentioned new medical facilities being constructed east of Warsaw, special camps, he called them, for dealing with undesirables more efficiently. He described experimental programs, ways to handle large populations through medical means rather than bullets. Too expensive otherwise, he explained, as if discussing crop irrigation rather than mass murder. Greta smiled and asked interested questions while memorizing every detail. That night she met Maria in a bombed-out church and passed along everything. The resistance sent the information to London. British radio broadcast warnings about death camps within 2 weeks. Weber never connected his dinner conversation to the broadcast, but he started proposing something else: marriage. He presented it in July, over champagne, logical and practical. "You're an exceptional nurse, Greta. Loyal, intelligent, beautiful. I'm advancing in my career. We'd make an excellent partnership. He produced a ring, silver with a small diamond, perfectly proper for a military wedding. Greta looked at the ring and calculated rapidly. As Weber's wife, she'd have access to his papers, his office, his secrets. She could photograph documents, learn about operations before they happened, feed intelligence to the resistance that could save hundreds. But she'd also have to share his bed, his life, his name. She'd have to become Mrs. Klaus Weber, wife of an SS officer, complicit in his world. The other nurses would think she'd betrayed everything. The resistance might suspect her of being a double agent. And Weber himself, he wasn't stupid. Marriage would give him access to her too. He could watch her constantly, monitor her movements, search her belongings. It was a trap disguised as an opportunity, or perhaps an opportunity disguised as a trap. She took the ring and said yes. Weber kissed her, satisfied and suspicious in equal measure. That night, Greta stared at the silver band on her finger and wondered which of them had just made the fatal mistake. They married on August 12, 1941, in a military chapel decorated with Nazi flags and white lilies. Greta wore a simple cream dress borrowed from Helga. Weber wore his SS uniform, medals polished to mirror brightness. The chaplain spoke about duty to the Reich and the sacred bond between Aryan souls. 20 guests attended, mostly Weber's colleagues. None of Greta's network came. They'd stopped speaking to her after the engagement announcement, convinced she'd chosen comfort over conscience. Only Margaretha understood, and barely. "You're insane," she'd whispered the night before the wedding. "He'll discover everything, then he'll kill you." Greta had simply smiled. "Or I'll discover everything first. Either way, we'll know soon." The wedding night was clinical. Weber was careful and distant, treating intimacy like a medical procedure requiring proper technique. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, while Greta lay awake, staring at shadows on the ceiling, wearing a dead woman's wedding ring. She'd become Mrs. Klaus Weber. The thought made her want to vomit. But the access was immediate and extraordinary. As Weber's wife, she moved into officers' housing, a small apartment with a private office, where he kept files and correspondence. He worked late most nights, leaving her alone with unlocked cabinets and unguarded documents. She began photographing everything using a tiny camera Maria had provided, a Minox barely larger than a cigarette lighter. Transport schedules, medical supply routes, lists of SS personnel and their assignments. She hid the film in hollowed-out books and passed them to Maria during staged shopping trips. In September, she found something that made her blood freeze. A memo describing Action Tfir, the euthanasia program for disabled Germans. Weber had been involved in the planning, had helped design the gas chambers disguised as shower rooms. He'd calculated optimal ratios of carbon monoxide to human body weight, determined how many people could be killed per hour with maximum efficiency. His notes were neat and precise, annotated with suggestions for improvement. She photographed the memo with shaking hands. That night at dinner, Weber discussed his day as if he'd been filing paperwork rather than documenting mass murder. He asked about her work at the hospital, complimented the roast chicken, mentioned he'd been assigned to visit the new facilities at Treblinka next month. "Would you like to come?" he asked. "It's quite remarkable what they've accomplished there." Greta declined politely, pleading too much work at the hospital. Weber nodded, unsurprised. He'd been testing her, measuring her reactions. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the constant assessment. He suspected her but couldn't prove anything. Not yet. In October, her gamble paid off spectacularly. Weber brought home personnel files for the entire Warsaw SS Medical Corps, planning to review them over the weekend. Greta photographed all 73 files in 4 hours, while he attended a meeting. The intelligence reached London within a week. 2 months later, British commandos assassinated 6 SS doctors based on information from those files. Weber investigated the leak for months, suspecting everyone except his loyal, loving wife who brought him coffee. While he worked, the largest rescue operation began with a single document Greta found in Weber's briefcase on November 1, 1941. A deportation order for 300 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto, scheduled for December 15. Destination: Treblinka. The memo was matter of fact, listing transport logistics like it described moving cattle rather than human beings. 300 people would board trains in 2 weeks and never return. Greta photographed the order, then sat in the bathroom with her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. 300. She'd saved individuals before, families, small groups. But 300 people couldn't hide in basements or slip out through morgue exits. This required something impossible. She called an emergency meeting with her network in a bombed warehouse. Maria brought 2 resistance fighters, serious men with weapons hidden under their coats. Margaretha, Elizabeth, and Helga arrived separately, faces tight with fear. When Greta explained the situation, silence filled the ruined building. Finally, Maria spoke. "We can't save 300 people. We don't have the safe houses, the supplies, the forged papers. It's impossible." Greta pulled out the photograph of Weber's memo. "Then we make it possible. We have 6 weeks. We start now." The plan was audacious and probably suicidal. They would forge mass quarantine orders declaring the entire group infected with typhus, too dangerous to transport. Then they'd move people in small groups over multiple nights, using ambulances and medical transport vehicles. The resistance would provide safe houses throughout Warsaw and false papers for everyone. Greta would forge the medical certificates, 300 individual documents declaring each person Polish Catholic from destroyed villages. They started immediately. Margarita worked 18-hour days creating forged papers, her hand cramping from writing the same lies repeatedly. Elizabeth coordinated with the underground, arranging safe houses and transport. Helga stole a blank medical forms and official stamps. Maria organized the logistics, mapping routes through the city that avoided checkpoints. Greta forged Weber's signature 300 times, each one perfect and damning. If discovered, they'd all be executed. She worked at night while Weber slept, her hands steady despite the terror. Each certificate was a life, a name, a person who deserved to exist. David Rosenberg became Piotr Kowalski. Rachel Goldberg became Anna Novak. 300 Jews became 300 Catholics on paper, their histories rewritten in Greta's precise handwriting. The extraction began December 1st. 5 people per night, moved through the hospital in laundry carts or on gurneys marked with false quarantine tags. The resistance met them at designated points, guided them to safe houses, gave them new identities. 10 people, then 20, then 50. The operation grew larger and more dangerous with each night. Weber noticed the unusual activity at the hospital. "Why so many quarantine cases suddenly?" he asked over breakfast, on December 8th. Greta shrugged, spreading jam on toast with steady hands. "Typhus outbreak in the ghetto. We're containing it." He watched her carefully but said nothing. By December 10th, they'd moved 273 people. 27 remained. Then Weber came home early with suspicion written across his face. Weber arrived home at 4 in the afternoon on December 11th, 1941, his face cold and expressionless. He found Greta in the kitchen preparing dinner, acting as if nothing was wrong. "We need to talk," he said quietly, and her heart stopped. He spread papers across the dining table. "Quarantine records, transport logs, inventory reports. I've been investigating the typhus outbreak you mentioned," he said. "The numbers don't match. 300 quarantine cases, but the ghetto reports no significant typhus spread. Medical supplies. Missing in exact quantities needed for that many patients. Ambulance logs showing trips to addresses that don't exist." Greta kept her expression neutral, continued chopping vegetables. "Perhaps there's been administrative confusion. The ghetto records are often incomplete." Weber walked closer until he stood directly behind her. She could feel his breath on her neck. "I checked the deportation list for December 15th. Every single person on it has been declared infected with typhus and quarantined. Every single one, Greta. All 300. What an extraordinary coincidence." She set down the knife, turned to face him. His eyes were ice, calculating and furious. "You've been very clever," he said softly. "Forging my signature, using my position, sleeping beside me while committing treason. Did you ever feel anything, or was it always just access?" Greta met his gaze without flinching. "Does it matter?" Weber's hand moved toward his holster. She thought he might shoot her right there in the kitchen, end it quickly. Instead, he pulled out handcuffs. "You're under arrest for crimes against the Reich. Treason, forgery, aiding enemies. You'll be executed, of course. But first, you'll tell me everything, everyone involved, every person you helped, every member of your network." She knew what that meant. Interrogation, torture, screaming until she betrayed everyone. Margareta, Elizabeth, Helga, Maria, all the people she'd saved. They'd all die because of her. Unless she acted now. The kitchen knife was still on the counter. Greta grabbed it and lunged, not at Weber but toward the door. She needed to run, to warn the others, to give them time to disappear. But Weber was faster. He caught her wrist, twisted until she dropped the knife, slammed her against the wall hard enough that her vision blurred. "You're not going anywhere," he said. Then the door burst open. Maria and 3 resistance fighters rushed in, guns raised. Weber released Greta, reaching for his pistol, but Maria shot first. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He fell, blood spreading across his uniform. Maria grabbed Greta's hand. "We have to go. Now. They knew you were compromised. We've been watching the apartment." Greta looked at Weber bleeding on the kitchen floor, conscious and staring at her with absolute hatred. Leaving him alive was a mistake. He'd report everything, hunt them all down. But she couldn't kill him. Not like this. Not in cold blood. That hesitation would cost her everything. They ran into the December night while Weber reached for the phone. Greta disappeared into the Warsaw Ghetto on December 15, 1941, the same day 300 people were supposed to board trains to Treblinka. The resistance hid her in a cramped attic above a bakery, sharing space with 2 Jewish families and enough rats to populate a small city. She cut her blonde hair short, dyed it black with bootblack, and became Katarzyna Wojcik, a Polish widow whose papers said she'd lost her husband at the front. Weber survived the gunshot and launched a manhunt that turned Warsaw upside down. SS checkpoints appeared on every corner. Houses were searched, papers scrutinized, anyone resembling Greta questioned for hours. He offered rewards, threatened civilians, executed people suspected of harboring her. His rage was personal and absolute. She'd made him look foolish, betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. He wanted her found, wanted to watch her hang. But Greta had vanished into the network she'd built. The people she'd saved protected her now, moving her between safe houses every few days, always one step ahead of Weber's searches. She couldn't work as a nurse anymore, couldn't use her medical training openly. Instead, she became a teacher in the ghetto's secret schools, teaching children whose parents had been deported or killed. The children called her Pani Katarzyna, and didn't know she was German. She taught them mathematics, history, poetry. She read them stories about brave heroes and happy endings, lies that helped them sleep at night despite the hunger and fear. In the evenings, she treated sick people using whatever supplies the resistance could smuggle in. No morphine anymore, barely any bandages, just her hands and knowledge keeping people alive a little longer. Margareta was arrested in February 1942. Weber interrogated her personally for 3 days before she broke and revealed 2 safe house locations. Both were raided within hours. 17 people died. Margarita was executed in March, shot in the back of the head in Pawiak prison. Greta learned about it from Maria and cried silently in the attic, unable to make noise that might alert neighbors. Elizabeth and Helga fled Warsaw in April, escaping to the countryside with forged papers, declaring them farm workers. They sent one message through the underground: "We're sorry, we can't do this anymore." Greta understood. Not everyone could live with constant terror. She didn't blame them for choosing survival. By July 1942, Greta had been hiding for 7 months. The ghetto was shrinking as deportations accelerated. Thousands disappeared weekly, loaded onto trains heading east. She knew where they went now. Everyone knew. The rumors from Treblinka had become certainties. No one returned from the camps. Maria visited the attic one evening with news. "Weber's been reassigned to Berlin. He's leaving Warsaw next week. You could escape, get new papers, leave Poland entirely?" Greta shook her head. 300 people are still alive because of what we did. Someone needs to remember their names. I'm staying. Maria didn't argue. She just handed Greta a pistol and said quietly, "Then you'll need this eventually." Word count. 500 words exactly. The deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto accelerated through the summer and fall of 1942. By January 1943, over 300,000 people had been sent to Treblinka. The ghetto that once held nearly 500,000 souls now contained barely 50,000, crowded into shrinking blocks surrounded by armed guards. Everyone understood what was coming. The Germans would empty the ghetto completely, sending every remaining Jew to the camps. Resistance was no longer about survival. It was about dying on their own terms. Greta joined the Jewish Combat Organization in February. Maria introduced her to Mordechai Anielewicz, a 24-year-old commander with tired eyes and absolute conviction. "We're going to fight," he told her. "When they come for the final deportation, we'll make them pay for every street." She offered her medical skills and the pistol Maria had given her. He accepted both without questions about her background. In the ghetto, past identities didn't matter, only present choices counted. They prepared through March and April. Smuggled weapons arrived piece by piece, hidden in supply carts and sewage tunnels. Homemade bombs were constructed in basement workshops using whatever materials could be found. Greta set up medical stations in bunkers, stocking them with stolen supplies and preparing for casualties she knew would be catastrophic. The fighters were mostly teenagers and young adults, boys and girls who'd watched their families murdered and decided death fighting was better than death in gas chambers. The uprising began on April 19, 1943, the eve of Passover. SS troops entered the ghetto, expecting routine deportation. Instead, they met Molotov cocktails and gunfire from windows and rooftops. Greta watched from her medical station as German tanks burned in the streets, as young fighters with homemade weapons held off professional soldiers for hours. The impossible was happening. The Jews of Warsaw were fighting back. The battle lasted 4 weeks. Greta worked 20-hour days treating wounded fighters, digging bullets from teenage bodies, holding hands as people died from burns and shrapnel. The Germans brought flamethrowers and artillery, systematically destroying buildings to flush out resistance. Fighters retreated into sewers and bunkers, continuing to attack even as the ghetto burned above them. She lost count of the dead, hundreds, then thousands. The medical stations overflowed with casualties until there was no room left, no supplies remaining, just her bare hands trying to stop bleeding that wouldn't stop. Mordechai was killed in early May, shot while defending a bunker. Most of the original fighters were dead within 3 weeks. On May 16, the Germans declared the uprising over. They demolished the Great Synagogue as a victory celebration. Survivors hid in bunkers and sewers, hunted like rats through the rubble. Greta was in a basement on Mila Street with 12 fighters when the SS found them. She raised her pistol, knowing it held only 3 bullets and facing 20 soldiers. Then the basement door exploded inward. Gas canisters rolled across the floor, releasing gray smoke that burned her lungs and made her vision darken. Her last conscious thought was that Weber had finally won. Greta woke in a Gestapo interrogation cell with a splitting headache and dried blood crusting her face. The 12 fighters she'd been hiding with were dead, executed in the bunker where they'd been captured. She'd been spared for a specific reason. Weber had returned to Warsaw specifically to interrogate her personally. He walked into the cell 3 days after her capture, his face calm and satisfied. "Hello, wife," he said quietly. The interrogations lasted weeks. Weber wanted names of everyone she'd helped, every member of the resistance network, every safe house location. He used techniques he'd perfected on other prisoners, calculated applications of pain designed to break will without causing death. Greta gave him nothing. She screamed, she bled, she passed out repeatedly, but she never spoke. Weber's frustration grew with each silent session. "You'll tell me eventually," he said during one interrogation in July 1943. "Everyone breaks. It's simply biology." Greta looked at him through swollen eyes and smiled with broken teeth. "You're right about biology, Klaus. Everyone dies too. I've made my peace with it." In August, the Gestapo transferred her to Pawiak prison while they decided her fate. Execution was certain, but Weber wanted public spectacle, a hanging in the city center to demonstrate what happened to traitors. While bureaucrats planned her death, Greta met other prisoners, women who'd been arrested for resistance activities. She shared her medical knowledge quietly, teaching them how to treat infections with limited supplies, how to recognize symptoms of typhus and dysentery spreading through the prison. One prisoner was Maria. She'd been captured in September during a raid on a safe house. They were placed in the same cell for 3 days, a brief reunion in hell. "I'm sorry," Maria whispered. "I should have made you leave Warsaw when we had the chance." Greta shook her head. "I made my choices, no regrets." The escape happened in October 1943, organized by resistance members who'd infiltrated the prison guards. During a shift change, doors were left unlocked, guard stations unmanned for crucial minutes. 23 prisoners fled into Warsaw's ruins. Greta and Maria were among them. They ran through bombed streets, while sirens wailed behind them, ducking into sewers and emerging miles away in the Christian district. The resistance smuggled them out of Warsaw entirely, moving them through safe houses toward the Soviet front lines advancing from the east. Weber pursued relentlessly, following every lead, interrogating anyone suspected of helping. He became obsessed, his career secondary to capturing the wife who'd humiliated him. For 16 months, Greta stayed ahead of him. She moved through Poland using different identities, working as a nurse in field hospitals, treating wounded resistance fighters and Soviet partisans. She dyed her hair red, then blonde again, wore glasses, walked with a limp. She became whoever she needed to be to survive another day. In January 1945, Soviet troops liberated Warsaw. The war was ending, Germany collapsing under Allied advances. Greta stood in the ruins of the ghetto and thought she'd finally escaped. Then Weber found her one last time, his gun raised and steady. Maria shot him first. The bullet caught Weber in the chest, and he fell among the rubble of the city he'd helped destroy. They buried him in the basement of a collapsed building and sealed the room with debris. Greta took his death certificate, forged her own execution with his signature one final time, and became Katarzyna Wojcik permanently. She fled to Berlin with papers declaring her a Polish refugee, married a kind man who never asked about her past, and lived 40 years believing her secrets died with Weber in that sealed basement room. She was wrong. Construction workers demolishing a building in Warsaw's Praga district made an impossible discovery in March 1986. Behind a false wall in the basement, hidden beneath decades of dust and forgetting, they found a room, small, perhaps 3 meters square, sealed so completely that the air inside tasted 40 years old. Inside were wooden crates, their contents preserved perfectly in the darkness. Medical supplies, bandages still white, morphine vials still full, and documents. 127 forged medical certificates, each one a masterpiece of deception. Death certificates for Jews who never died. Transport orders for patients who never existed. Quarantine notices for epidemics that were pure fiction. Every document bore the same signature at the bottom. The initials were cramped, practiced, repeated so many times they'd become automatic. GH. The Polish authorities called in historians, brought in experts on wartime forgeries. Dr. Anna Zimmer, a specialist in resistance networks, spent 6 months analyzing the papers. The forger had medical knowledge, access to official German forms, and the skill to replicate multiple officers' signatures. The documents saved lives, moving people through checkpoints, out of ghettos, away from deportations. Conservative estimates suggested at least 200 people survived because of these papers. But who was GH? The signature matched no known resistance member. German archives contain no record of a forger with those initials operating in Warsaw. It was as if a ghost had worked for years in the heart of occupied Poland, saving lives the Nazis wanted dead, then disappeared without leaving a name. Until Anna found one document different from the rest. A marriage certificate. German military issue, dated August 1941. The bride's signature, hurried and genuine, spelled out the full name, Greta Hoffmann. The discovery made international news. Dr. Zimmer published her findings, and survivors began coming forward with stories about a German nurse who'd saved their lives during the war. But the trail went cold. Official records said Greta Hoffmann had been executed by the Gestapo in January 1945, shot by her husband Dr. Klaus Weber in the ruins of Warsaw. Her death certificate was signed by Weber himself. Then a letter arrived at Dr. Zimmer's office in November 1986. It was from Hannah Brandt in Berlin, a 32-year-old teacher whose grandmother had recently died. My grandmother was Katarzyna Wojcik, Hannah wrote, but I found documents in her belongings after she passed. I think she might have been Greta Hoffmann. Hannah had discovered the truth while sorting through her grandmother's papers after the funeral. Among the usual documents was a small leather journal, hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible. The journal contained names, dates, and detailed accounts written in German. It described forging documents, hiding Jews, fighting in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. It was signed GH. At the bottom of every entry. Her grandmother had lived quietly in West Berlin since 1946, working as a seamstress, raising 2 children, never mentioning the war except to say she'd lost everyone. Hannah had always known her as Katarzyna, a Polish refugee with sad eyes and a reluctance to discuss the past. She never imagined her grandmother was a German nurse who'd married an SS officer and saved 300 lives. Dr. Zimmer traveled to Berlin and examined the journal. The handwriting matched the signatures on the forged documents perfectly. Hannah also had 43 letters carefully preserved, all addressed to Greta Mueller from survivors thanking her for saving their lives. The letters had been sent to various addresses throughout Europe over 40 years, always finding their way to Katarzyna Wojcik through underground networks of former resistance members. Hannah spent 6 months tracking down letter writers, now elderly themselves, living in Israel and America, and throughout Europe. They confirmed everything. Katarzyna Wojcik was Greta Mueller. She'd survived the war, fled to Berlin with false papers, and hidden her identity for 40 years. The official records said she'd been executed, but the records were wrong. In Tel Aviv, Hannah found Maria Kowalska in a nursing home. The old woman was 91, her memory fading but still sharp about certain things. She remembered Greta clearly. "Your grandmother saved my life 3 times, she said. Once in the hospital, once during the uprising, once when Weber found us in January 45. She shot him before he could shoot her. Then we buried him in the rubble and she became Katarzyna. She wanted to forget everything, to be someone new." Hannah published her grandmother's story in 1987. The book documented everything, included photographs from the journal, letters from survivors, and testimony from those still living. It revealed Greta Müller as one of the righteous among nations, a German who'd risked everything to save Jews during the Holocaust. Her grandmother never got to see the recognition. She died believing her story should stay buried, that being Katarzyna was safer than being Greta. But 300 people lived because of her courage, had children and grandchildren who existed because one nurse decided some orders were too monstrous to follow. Some heroes never seek recognition. They carry their courage silently, choosing ordinary lives over acclaim. Greta Müller became Katarzyna Wojcik and lived 40 years in quiet anonymity, the weight of her past, hidden in journals and letters she could never destroy. But truth has a way of surfacing. The 300 she saved, and the generations they created, stand as living monuments to one woman's refusal to be complicit. In the end, perhaps that's what resistance truly means: choosing humanity when the world demands monstrosity, then living with the consequences long after the battle's end.